I'm 28 and I wasted my 20s. I don't own my own car. I live in a rented apartment, living from paycheck to paycheck, and I don't have a big savings account. I believe that the reason why I'm here is because of the fact that I've indulged in comfort for most of the time that I was in, specifically, the early stages of my 20s. Because I spent most of the time smoking weed, playing video games, indulging in comfort, and making excuses to why I shouldn't take any action because I randomly or magically have the time to make it happen anyways. So in this video, I want to share with you all the 3 most important lessons I've learned in these last 8 years so that you can be better than where I'm at right now in life when you reach the age of 28. Cool. So the very first lesson and the biggest lesson that I'm going to share is the one that had the biggest impact in my life because everything is built upon this. And that is what I had to learn, that life is how it is. I just had to deal with it. So when I started, but when I was in my early 20s, specifically 20 years old, I had graduated high school. I was an aspiring artist, and I thought that most of my time would now go into working on accomplishing that goal. So I was visualizing and fantasizing about traveling the world, being on tour with my crew, selling out shows, that the crowd would be singing my songs out loud in front of my face while I was on the stage, and I was being like godified almost in that moment because I had the fantasy and the desire to have that happen. That women would be throwing themselves at me, which was such a lovely fantasy. But then I got slapped with the reality that I had to work a 9 to 5. I had to go work a full-time job because mom and dad needed me to actually help them in the household, to help them pay the bills that they were already paying and have been paying for a big chunk of my life, the time that I've spent living with them. All throughout, I was born to my 20s, and at that point as well. And I didn't know what was happening. I thought, no, I don't want this. I really didn't want to work a full-time job, but I also didn't want to I didn't want to disappoint my parents. So the first job that I had applied to and that I worked at, I was in a warehouse where I was preparing the orders to be put inside of the truck so that I could then go from our warehouse to then the purchaser, basically, the person who we actually made the preparation for. And I was miserable because you're 20 years old, you're motivated, you're driven in life, and I ended up in an environment with 40-year-old people who were overworked. They were not interested in life anymore. They were absolutely miserable to be around because all they did was complain. And that destroyed my entire expectation of what I was going to see, how life is going to be. But it was the truth. It was the reality I had to live. Eventually, I had to crash out. I quit working that job because of an argument that I had with a superior in that warehouse who started insulting me. And I was a shy individual back then. I was afraid to say something back, so I held it inside of me. What eventually happened is that I abruptly quit working that job because of how messed up I felt because of that situation. It had spiraled me down into smoking a lot of weed instead of working on my goal when I had actually quit the job. Because I had set the expectation, or I had thought that, okay, I'm going to quit this job, told my colleague, okay, I'm going to make music, go full time in a couple of months. It's going to happen. I'm going to magically turn everything the way that I want it to be. But then when I had quit working the full-time job, the very first thing that I would do when I would wake up in the morning is to play video games, hang out with my friends, or smoke some weed. And then I'd work a little bit on the music, feel a little bit uncomfortable, and smoke weed more. That wasn't really going to help me to get where I wanted to go. And so the point of this is that I was making up an illusion of how life was going to be. I wasn't willing to accept how life was at that moment. Which was, I had to work a full-time job. I had to pay the bills. I had to build myself up in some kind of way because what I was doing back then wasn't actually going to help me move forward. And that brings us to now, where I am working full-time. The opportunity for me lies in learning how to be efficient with my time so that I can build an online business, which is what I want to have. And maybe not even specifically an online business, but an income as an entrepreneur. And if I gotta work a 9 to 5, that is what it is, and that is the life that I gotta live. And that's something that I just couldn't accept back then. And I was making up the excuse that if I have this thing first in my life, I can now live this, or I can now be happy. If I am an artist and I'm making a full-time income out of my art, then I will be able to tell myself that I'm proud of who I am. And that if I don't work a full-time job, I would then have the time to eventually work on my goal. But I didn't do it. And I didn't respect myself enough back then to accept that life isn't going to go exactly as I want it to go. There are a set of cards that I'm dealt with from the moment that I was born with. And this is what it is. And it's on me to make something out of that what I have right now. Which is also, by the way, business lesson number 1. Use what you have. That brings us to the second lesson that I want to share. The second lesson that had the second biggest impact in my life, and that is that I had to learn to hate being comfortable. I had to hate being comfortable because there was a certain point when I actually tried to develop myself. I tried to become better. I tried to improve. I sat down behind my computer to work on music. But when I'd hit a roadblock, when I hit an obstacle and I felt some discomfort, what would I do? I would shut everything off and start smoking weed because it made me feel good. And so I had the association that if I don't feel good, I should not work. And so I should always be feeling good instead of working. But that's the biggest illusion that I had set up for myself, because that desire for comfort, that desire for feel good, made me not take the necessary action to push through the roadblocks, to push through the obstacles that I had in front of me, which actually then would develop me into becoming, or at least living the life that I desire to be, and now being in a better position in my life. And because I started doing that in my early 20s, and because weed was the biggest influence of it, as I noticed most of it was either linked to smoking weed or playing video games. But usually what would happen is I would smoke weed and then play video games. So the one was linked with the other. It led me to hit rock bottom at 24. All the actions that I was taking eventually compounded into this specific moment where I was sitting outside below, like not below, but close to freezing point. I was higher than the Burj Khalifa. I'd already smoked my 3rd joint that evening. I was supposed to be going to bed, but I wasn't going to bed. I was watching I don't even know what exactly I was watching on Netflix, if it was a documentary or a soap or series or whatever you want to call it. It was the loneliest I've ever been. I was the most miserable I thought I would never be. My phone was buzzing because my ex-girlfriend at the time was calling me because I hadn't spoken to her in a little bit. I was ignoring her calls, ignoring her messages, not saying good morning, not being present at all, which was a huge shift from how I was back then, or before that moment when I hit rock bottom. But at the same time, I was anticipating the breakup because I knew that I didn't love her. And I didn't want to speak to her because I knew that I was being comfortable. And I was being comfortable because at the starting of my 20s, I decided to live a life that whenever I felt discomfort, I would resort to comfort. And I was with her because I couldn't deal with the discomfort of being lonely in my 20s, or like not having anyone that I could have sex with, not have anyone that I could date in my 20s. Because I was nothing. I had nothing. Nothing on my name. I wasn't making something out of myself. I was good at pretending to be doing something, but I wasn't actually being productive with my time. I wasn't taking the necessary steps to move me forward. And so at that point, everything accumulated. And I'm glad it did, because there were two decisions that I could make in that moment. And that was to either stay where I'm at or make the hard decision, be in discomfort, and change my life completely. And luckily, I took the second path. A month later, I'd broken up with her, which wasn't easy, but I'm glad that I took that step. I got clean. I started to gratitude journal. I started to meditate. I started praying to God, asking for guidance in life because I was so unstable at that time. Mentally and physically, I didn't know what was going to happen. And I just didn't want to have another mental crash out while I was on the path of being in discomfort. And I'm not sure if you know what discomfort is, but the best way to discover what discomfort is to go into the shower, turn off the cold water, freezing cold water, turn that on, and to then go below it. And then see what your body does. See what your mind thinks. Your body will start cramping up. You'll be in physical pain, mental pain, even emotional pain while you're in the cold water. And then the next time you'll have to do it, your body will already start cramping up before it happens. And I needed to have that in my life. I needed to be in discomfort because most of my life I was comfortable. Most of my life I was ungrateful for that what I had, because I had my parents paying the bills. I had my parents taking care of me. If there was a problem, my parents would solve it. And I was a 24-year-old man who didn't even know how to handle issues, who didn't even know what it was like to deal with discomfort, while my father has spent most of his life working for us, making sure that me and my brother and my mother had a good life. I don't want to know what kind of things my dad needed to do in order to make sure that we stayed afloat, that we had food on the table. But I know what I know, and he wasn't always home. And at that time, I didn't understand. But when I finally did understand that I needed to be in discomfort, my life then changed around being in discomfort. I started working out to emulate the pain. I started to actively work on my side hustles after work while working a full-time job. And I was actually making a lot of music back then. And I was the happiest I've ever been at that moment. Because discomfort is good and necessary for growth. The thing with comfort is it's fun in the moment. You'll get that gratification, especially when I think of it. I get that instant gratification. I feel good right now. I feel happy. But later down the line, my life is worse. And the thing with being in discomfort is that in the short term, I notice pain. I notice that my life is not good. But in the long term, I benefit off of it. This brings me to a quote that I heard around that time, which is, hard times create strong men create good times create weak men, and weak men create hard times. It's actually a quote that stuck to me. Because in that moment, when I had hit rock bottom, I was a weak man. In good times that were created by my father and my mother sacrificing their lives to make sure that we had a good life, got me to be in rock bottom. Is it their fault? No, it was me. For not knowing this, for not understanding this, for not having learned this anytime sooner. But I'm glad I did. And so the third lesson that I want to share is not one that I thought I'd ever share and ever think, but it's the fact that a 9 to 5 is not a curse, but instead it is a blessing. Because at this current stage in my life, I'm 28, I'm a married man, I work a full-time job in order to pay the bills, in order to survive. I desired to build an online business, or at least a business, being an entrepreneur. And recently, I've been able to close my second client, and I'm making progress to where I want to go. And this would not have happened if I wasn't working my full-time job, because my full-time job allows me to make sure that we survive, to make sure that if the bills are paid in this apartment, that we don't have to live on the street, or that I don't have to move to my mother and father or my mother-in-law to live at their place because I decided to live a comfortable life and not make hard decisions that would make sure that I would then in the long term live a better life, a worse life actually. Because if I am in discomfort, which I am from working a 9 to 5, I would not have been able to accomplish what I have accomplished so far. And so my 9 to 5 gets me to be in discomfort. It gets me to learn how to deal with people who I don't always want to be around. It keeps me disciplined because I have to wake up on time. I have to make sure that I'm at my job on time. I have to make sure that I take care of my responsibilities at work. I make sure that my tasks are finished, that I go to bed on time so that I then wake up on time and have the energy to perform well at my full-time job. It teaches me how to actually take care of responsibility. It teaches me how to be efficient with my time after work so that I can be an entrepreneur when I am not working. And it gets me to live the lesson. Number 1, life is how it is. And I just gotta learn how to deal with it. Because this is my reality. This is the life that I live. And this is not something that I wanted to accept for a long time in my life. And I've quit many 9 to 5s thinking that I cannot achieve any kind of goal that I want if I'm not working my 9 to 5. If I am working a 9 to 5. But that was the biggest reality that I sold myself. It was the biggest lie that I had sold myself. And I don't want any of you all to go through the same mistakes that I have made. So, with everything said, always remember that you are 100% responsible for the results in your life. Make the hard decision today, and I'll see you in the next one. All right? Bye-bye.